Alright, what's up everybody? I do want to add some context to what this video is before I even get into the script. So, long story short, I posted a video about the deep stretch and how it's misunderstood and overrated in most portions of the fitness industry, and that video got a lot of traction this past Friday night, kind of randomly. I figured I'd gotten a shout out, maybe it hit the algorithm or something, and then it had come to my attention that the video was posted to the natural bodybuilding page on Reddit. So I took a look at that, and sure enough, it was probably about what I could expect. It was a bunch of cynical takes and how everybody's overthinking everything, and all you need to do to reach your peak physique is just train hard, be consistent, blah, blah, blah. So I recorded a response video as a reaction that Saturday morning. I didn't like how it came out because there was just way too many comments on the Reddit page to where by the time I was done with the video, I was burned out. I wasn't even reading everything properly. Like, it was just a mess of a video. I had a lot of good takes in it, in my opinion, that are unfortunately going to be left behind, but there was just too much of me stumbling on my words and, like, not wording things as efficiently as I want to and whatnot. So I figured nothing better than just to respond with a scripted video about not exactly what they were saying, but their overall thought process on learning in the fitness industry, in furthering your education and observations as a bodybuilder. Let's get to the video. No idea what I'm going to title it, but I don't know about you guys, but I've always been someone who has a fascination with becoming a master of my craft. I take pride in what I do, and I genuinely enjoy learning about what I do, which is lifting. This seems normal, right? Look at the people around you. Your friends that enjoy fishing, they know all the good spots. They have multiple rods and lures and enjoy learning more about fishing. Again, doesn't this seem normal? I'd say yes, it is for any sport, profession, or hobby, except one in particular, bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, in the fitness industry in general, is where curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking go to die. I have so many thoughts on this topic, but I just want to say first and foremost, this entire notion drives me crazy. I'm a creative type, I think critically, and I'm curious about any interest that I have. Whenever I present new ideas or concepts, it seems like there's always a group of people who disagree with me. And I'm not saying these people disagree with my takes. I'm saying they disagree with the fact that I even think critically about lifting or express any degree of observation or curiosity. It's not even what I say that they don't like, it's the fact that I'm even saying anything. And it's not just me. These people reject anyone who asks questions that go beyond the basics of lifting. If someone doesn't take the basics seriously, it's not because they don't understand them, it's because they're not serious lifters. Look at the volume of the advice that's given of just stick to the basics, train hard, and focus on progressive overload. So why isn't the average person in the gym becoming more jacked? It's because the people you give this advice to aren't actually passionate about bodybuilding for the process or the results. Some people would say, anyone is passionate about their results. It's just the difficulty of the training that deters them. But I'd say if they're actually passionate about getting jacked, that will override any ounce of hesitation to work hard for their results. The fitness industry caters to the lowest common denominator at the expense of serious lifters. Your average serious lifter will reach their first major plateau at the intermediate stage. How far into that stage they get is dependent on how optimized their training is and their genetics for the most part. Nearly everyone understands the basics. They're practically common sense for the most part. Train hard, train often enough to keep the ball rolling, but not so often you get hurt. Generally use a big range of motion. Keep an eye on progressive overload. Who doesn't understand that? Here's how you can differentiate between serious lifters and non-serious lifters when knowledge is equated. The serious lifters will be somewhere on the spectrum of an intermediate level physique. The non-serious lifters will look like they've never lifted a day in their life. I promise you, it's not because they don't understand the basics in most cases. It's because they don't want to work hard. So when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture of the common lifting advice given out, I always wonder why people spend so much time catering their advice to beginners who aren't serious about lifting. Look at any lifting forum, any comment section on a big channel, or even any large content creator themselves. I've said this before, but as YouTube channels grow, they dumb down their advice. They give up on the serious lifters who follow them, to try and teach people that don't give two shits about lifting, they just have a mild interest in looking good. Most of these people say you can grow from anything as a beginner, so why even give advice if anything works? It's quite hypocritical if you ask me. This was the main thing I had in mind when I made the channel. I was so sick of trying to learn anything beyond the basics and getting told, oh, it doesn't matter, just focus on progressive overload and get strong on squat, bench, deadlifts. Hearing that advice makes my eye twitch at this point. I'm not saying I disagree with it entirely, but it's just stupid to limit yourself knowledge-wise. Even look at that advice and how much my mindset has shifted on those concepts. Even if the concept remains the same, your perspective has the ability to drastically change the way you interpret and execute that concept in practice. Look at the squat, bench, deadlift advice, for example. What these people say is anyone who has a big squat, bench, and deadlift is jacked. And is that true? Sure, for the most part. But is that the most efficient way to train? And beyond efficiency, is it even the best way to develop a complete physique? Absolutely not. Let me break down how I used to interpret this advice. Squat, bench, deadlift are the most potent lifts for muscle growth because everyone with big numbers on these lifts is big. The reason these lifts work so well is because they train nearly every muscle in the body, and because they're the heaviest lifts you can do, and heavier weights are more stimulative. Progressive overload and getting stronger has to be the main focus for muscle growth, and every time you can add a rep or add weight to the bar, that increase in stimulus will drive muscle growth. Since squat, bench, and deadlift are the heaviest lifts you can do, they're not only the most potent for growth, they also have the most potential for progressive overload because you can add weight all the time. Training arms directly is a joke. It's side delts too, because you can barely add weight over time, so what's the point? That means you won't get enough progressive overload to actually grow. Progressively overloading on deadlifts in rows is the best way to grow your arms. Can you see how this mindset would eventually hold me back? Sure enough, I plateaued as an intermediate lifter. None of my lifts would go up, and my arms were disproportionately smaller than the rest of my physique, along with my calves, abs, and what would have been my delts and lats had I not accidentally trained those two muscle groups properly. You can see how, when you understand lifting at a basic level, you can get to the intermediate stage as long as you're serious about it. But they don't let you learn past that because people think you're just going to overthink everything. It's ridiculous. But just to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, doesn't this seem like the person in need of advice? I was a serious lifter, and I was losing passion for what I had basically dedicated my life to because I couldn't learn a thing from the dumbed-down fitness industry who loves to cater to non-serious lifters at the expense of serious lifters. This eventually led me to take time away from the fitness industry. I spent a lot of that time questioning everything I had heard up until that point. I decided to take matters into my own hands and think critically about everything, as well as experiment with things and analyze my progress to this point. That was key. I analyzed what worked and what didn't. My lat training and delt training led me to a lot of my conclusions. It was after this period of time when it all started to click. Me, who is somewhat regularly talked about as a paralysis by analysis breeder who overthinks and overcomplicates everything, has now had a breakthrough in my understanding of lifting, and that's how the Basement Bodybuilding channel started. I needed to share these concepts in hope of helping lifters in the same boat as my intermediate self. And for anyone who's been around the channel for a while, I might be fairly jacked now, but I was an intermediate when I started the channel. Look at my old training vlogs. I've followed my core philosophies in practice so I can talk the talk and, most importantly, walk the walk. I showed you the journey. I showed you the process of me following my principles and them working. 18-inch arms, repping out 250 on JM press. That's twice as much as most of these people that critique the way I think bench press. I've shown you firsthand that the nuances and finer details of lifting and programming for bodybuilding do matter. I've spent a lot of my time covering my philosophy on progressive overload on this channel, but if you're new or unfamiliar with it, watch my videos about progressive overload anxiety, or about how we view progressive overload backwards. Some of these might be old videos, but the concept is still there. I'm just a little bit rough around the edges in terms of filming content. Not that I'm great at it now, so I'm trying to humble myself. To put my philosophy into a brief quote, here's how it would go. Progressive overload is a core principle of strength gain and muscle growth. If you're not seeing progressive overload in your training, you're likely not growing, However, the main difference here is to understand that progressive overload isn't the cause of muscle growth, it's the effect. If you took a set of 225 on bench to failure and got 10 reps, and progressive overload is what causes growth, what are you going to do next week? See, you're stuck. You can't do 225 for 11 as proven this week. But the stimulus created from that set of 225 for 10 caused muscle growth, which will result in strength gain due to that added size. And 225 for 11 will be possible next week, or at least sooner than later, if you are actually growing. If progressive overload was the driver of growth and not the other way around, how could you grow your arms or side delts? The best lifts for these muscle groups have barely any progressive overload potential. So how does it make sense that the people who train their arms directly have bigger arms than the people who only train them through their presses and pulls, who focus on progressive overload more? It's simple. The direct lifts for arms create a growth stimulus. It's almost common sense. Just because the increments to add weight are proportionally much bigger, causing a perception of a lack of progressive overload, doesn't mean it won't work, because it's the act of lifting that creates stimulus, not adding weight every week. It's also not an either or. You can train hard and improve your training simultaneously. This is my biggest gripe with the whole resistance towards giving advice that the fitness industry practices for whatever reason. They fall for the false dichotomy that you must either train hard and stick to the basics or overthink and get paralysis by analysis. The prevalence of this drives me crazy. I have a feeling people just hear this advice so much, so then they start to spew it on their own. Some people fall so hard for the appeal to simplicity. Others have gotten their results and project their own complacency onto others with this advice. Want to know what the lifters asking these questions are doing? They're either serious lifters or they're not. The non-serious lifters don't need any advice because they won't train hard or consistently or focus on progressive overload, regardless of how many times you shove basic common sense down their throat. The serious lifters that need advice beyond the basics are already training hard. Those are the people that need advice. They are stuck. They just want to keep learning and keep getting better. If you're learning something new, it doesn't mean that you stop doing what you're currently doing. You just slowly make it better. And before you say, oh, but what percentage difference will that actually make at the end of the day? Who cares? You can't measure that in a controlled study. It's about teaching people principles for better decision making in the present and the future. You can't quantify that. Even if it doesn't directly improve someone's gains in the present, it can help them avoid pitfalls in the future. It gives them reasoning to make decisions. If someone is serious about lifting, it's a good thing for them to pursue further knowledge in the topic. It allows them to help themselves and have an airtight grasp on lifting as a whole to explain or teach other people these concepts. If you want to have a good BS detector in the fitness industry, you have to understand lifting. You can't just understand that you have to lift hard and consistently and focus on progressive overload. Because if you don't understand anything beyond that, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to explain lifting to anybody else. You're not going to be able to have a good BS detector when gimmicks do arise. You're not going to be able to make consistent decisions with rational reasoning behind them. Another example worth mentioning is the fact that you need to understand your training to believe in it. If consistency and effort really are key, wouldn't the lifter have better consistency and effort if they weren't second-guessing everything they did because they actually understood what works and why their program is the way it is? And I get it. There are gimmicks that need to be avoided that beginners might not have the experience level to detect. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And someone is falling for those gimmicks. Recentering them on the basics is absolutely beneficial. But let's keep it at that and not try to prevent anyone from furthering their knowledge in regards to lifting. Any other sport or profession takes what they do seriously. And I don't care if the top physiques aren't getting better, which they are. We need to focus on the average physiques. Do you really think the average person wouldn't improve their results from understanding more than just the basic principles of lifting? Look around in the gym. If all it took was the basics to reach your potential as a bodybuilder, everyone would look worlds better. If the top 1% of competitive bodybuilders haven't seen statistically significant gains relative to bodybuilders throughout history, it is what it is. But do you really think everyone will happen to stumble upon the ideal training plan and happen to adhere for it for years or decades, do you really think people without the genetic gifts for the sport, let alone genetic disadvantages, will really reach their peak without furthering their knowledge and comprehension of bodybuilding? What about the people like me, who understood the basics at a surface level, but applied them backwards because I didn't understand lifting as a whole? Either way, I've been talking about this for a while now, so I'll end the video here. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In the meantime, I will see you guys in the next video. Last thing I'd want to add, do you agree with me, or do you agree with that Reddit page? Do you agree that it's good to understand lifting regardless of how much it helps you percentage-wise because you can't quantify that, or should you just follow the basics, which in my opinion, as I explained here, will inevitably lead you to plateau at some point in the intermediate stage? Let me know.